So, hi, friends. It's Doug Reeves. Welcome to Creative Leadership Solutions. We're really happy to talk to you about students that are so important to the present and to the future of our country, multilingual learners. I want to invite my panelists to chime in, and thanks to you, you've already submitted some questions that we want to have. If we run out of those, I've got some of my own, because I spoke a lot with my multilingual students that I taught. 2/3 of my kids did not speak English primarily at home. But I want to start with introducing Jessica Lucero Flores, and I want to really ask you to help our panelists understand and help our participants understand what was most important to them. So let me launch with you, and then I'll introduce the rest of our panelists.
Why don't we start with Jessica Gomez first, Doug? Why don't we have two Jessicas here. Why don't we start with Jessica Gomez, and then we'll kick it over to Nino, and then we'll wrap it with Jessica Lucero Flores.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Jessica, if you want to give some background and tell our participants what you're currently doing, how you contribute to education, that would be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Well, welcome everyone. It's truly an honor to be here this afternoon. So my name is Jessica Gomez, and I am currently the Director of Continuous Improvement and Accountability, and also a Creative Leadership Associate. I am in Southern California, so I'm in Menifee, which is right about 20 miles from Riverside. And I was a principal of Title I schools for 14 years. I taught only in Title I schools. And if you work in a Title I school, typically you have a high number of English learners. So my elementary school, as an elementary school principal, my elementary school had 260 English learners. So of a school of 600. And so I've had a lot of experience working with our English learners. I grew up as an English learner as well. My parents were immigrants. And so I currently now in my new district actually oversee what we here in California is the LPAC testing. And that is the assessment that is given to our English learners to track the progress on their English language and whether they get reclassified as a non-English learner. So I have had, this is near and dear to my heart. And I'm so glad to be able to be here today to share my experience and to learn from each and every one of you.
Thank you. And do you have a question from one of our participants?
Yeah, so one of the questions that came forth was making our learners feel safe while to make mistakes while they're learning.
Yes.
And how do we help them feel connected to a school community? And then how do we get parents involved? And so as I was thinking about that, just like any great teacher would do, is you want to model that risk taking. Like it's okay to make mistakes. That we have norms in our classrooms where we do not laugh at our friends. We don't because when we make a mistake, and it's about creating a safe environment in your classrooms and in your schools, and making it a point to we were talking with Nino earlier, and making a point to say, I see you. I am trying to get to understand you and your needs, and I want to see what I know you bring a lot to the table. And one of the best ways to find out what they truly do bring to the table is making that connection with your families. So talking to the parents, the caregivers, whoever they may be. We have all English learners are not made the same. Right. So we have English learners. It's not a one size fits all when it comes to English learners. It's we have some who are long-term English learners who have been here since kindergarten, are now in 6th grade, and they're still considered English learners. And then we have newcomers, which have two totally very distinct needs. And so getting to truly understand that student's story. And then we have kids who come to us as unaccompanied minors. Right. And think about what they've experienced and what they bring to the table and what their needs are. So I think it's really going to come down to understanding the story of each of your multilingual learners, and truly taking the time to help them be seen, and truly taking the time to get to know what they bring to the table and how you can best support them.
Thank you so much. That's really insightful. And I want to invite all of our participants, if you have questions, please put them in the chat room, and Lisa will keep an eye on those. So don't wait until the end. We're really happy to hear from you in between now and when we finish. Dr. Collado, I'm so happy that you were able to be with us today because you have both a professional and personal experience we just heard Jessica talk about community engagement, and I know you've written books about that and written chapters about that. So I'm
Yes.
really happy to hear from you and how you can respond to our panelists today. Thanks, Dr. Collado.
Of course. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation that is deeply personal, as I will always be an English language learner. And interestingly enough, one of the most rewarding process of learning English is acquiring the culture as well as the language, and understanding that there was nothing wrong with me. It was just a language that was in the way. My name is Nino Collado, and I am a retired school principal from South Florida. Began my work in New York, teaching actually English as a second language to mostly Latino students from Upper Manhattan, and Chinese students from Chinatown that gravitated to a school that is Norman Thomas in Central Park, in Park Avenue and 34th Street, of all places, in Midtown Manhattan. And it was interesting because one of the things that we set out to do as a teacher, and of course then as an administrator, was celebrate their culture. Acquiring a language is a very interesting, frustrating process. And sometimes I find that we see these students as almost learning deficient, where they are tagged in terms of, like, you can't take electives, you have to take those type of things. And I believe in this, in the shelter instruction process, because just because I'm learning English, it doesn't mean that I don't like music and I want to play a trumpet
Yeah.
or be part of the academic classes. My family also has interest in seeing in getting involved. It's just a matter of meeting them where they are. And there's a question. One of the questions that we have is building relationships. But I can agree with Jessica more. One of the schools that we visit is part of CLS. I was telling Lisa that the teacher wrote the objective and the success criteria in English. Google translated it and wrote it in Spanish, introduced the class, had some fun, had some vocabulary in the lesson. But as soon as he rolled out the lesson, he went to the 2-3 desks where they had where he had the English language learners, kind of gave him a punch in the shoulder and says, "Are you okay? Do you get it?" type of thing. That minute of their life meant the world to those kids.
Right.
I'm included. He sees me, and my frustration, I could express it to him as a learner. So happy to be here.
And Dr. Collado, if I could just follow up with one thing, you said something really important, that students need to feel competent, particularly our adolescent students. And so when you talked about music and art and dance and all the other things, that they may not feel competent when they're put on the spot for English, but there are so many other ways where they can feel competent. And that is key to relieving some of the fear that is associated with schools. Would you mind just for a second elaborating on how do we help students feel competent even when they're unsure of themselves in English?
I'll give you a very specific example. We had an aeronautics course, which was basically teaching the kids the concepts of aeronautics, from being a pilot to the aeronautics industry. Then the course was so successful that in the leadership group, we decided to expand it to a second course and even a third one. So one of the guidance counselors said, but in this one, we don't want to have any level 5s you have to be, or whoever wants to take the course will take the course. And let's start with the English language learners. So we actually created 2 tracks of the course and did it interest-based. We just created a space for the kids who are interested in the aeronautics industry to just have some fun with it. Creating that milieu to discuss their interests was a motivator fact for them to then increase in the vocabulary and other types of conversation. By the mid of the year, there was no difference in terms of what kid was doing better than the other kid, because interest drove it. The kids felt seen, validated, and their intelligence was validated not by how much English vocabulary words they knew that day, but how much the teacher how much support they got from the teacher in the school.
I love that particular example because I used to be a pilot and I did the very same thing with math classes. And, you know, our young men and young women love aviation, and they also can almost have a sensory feel of, gee, if I move in this direction or that direction, what is it going to feel like? It was a great way to bring my multilingual students together. Thank you, Nino.
Of course.
Jessica, can we please hear from you?
Hello to everybody on whichever part of the planet you're on. My name is Jessica Lucero Flores. I am a full-time associate with Creative Leadership Solutions. As my first year with them, I have been all over the world. I say that kind of tongue in cheek in the sense that I started my career as a Title I educator and then moved into instructional coaching. I spent that career 12 years with students who immigrated to the United States, mainly from Latin American countries. And then I myself decided to emigrate, and I went to Colombia and to Mexico, where I was a director of learning, or sometimes a middle school principal and a high school principal. So I have a wide variety of experience with different levels of English language learners and multilingual learners. Some of my students who came from Korea to Mexico actually had to study not only in Spanish and in English, and then would spend their afternoon studying in their home language. So I learned a lot from them because when I left the United States to go live abroad for 10 years, I did not leave with the fluency in Spanish that I have today. And so I was on the kind of the side that Nino was talking about earlier of showing up and feeling, I would say, confident in my intellect, in what I have done in my home country. But once I landed in Colombia, my AP Spanish class that I took 20 years ago just didn't suffice, and I was back to square one. Luckily, I had my wits about me, right? So I could go to a podcast. I took some conversational Spanish, and I guess that I was proactive. But that's because that's my growth mindset and how I was showing up in the world. When our students come to our classrooms now in the United States, and while I'm visiting schools in California that are coming from everywhere from Vietnam to the Philippines to any of the Latin American countries, my heart really goes out to them because I know what it's like to have in my back pocket this idea that I know I have problem solving, critical thinking.
Right.
I have this creativity, and there is a frustration. For example, my own personal experiences when I had to go get my immigration papers done. So that way, when I was getting my work visa in Mexico, I know what I needed to do, but I didn't have the words to describe it. And it's a very frustrating feeling when you know you're competent, but you don't have the language. So I'm a really strong believer in scaffolding. And I'm a really strong believer in strong tier 1 instruction, which is accessible to all teachers. I really feel wholeheartedly that every teacher needs to be a reading teacher first. Even as a former science teacher, I knew that I had to give my students a really strong background in vocabulary before they were able to understand plate tectonics.
Yeah.
And so somebody here on the chat put cognates for Spanish, and that's super important. I believe there's 40% of the Spanish cognates kind of align with English, which is very helpful in schools like where we're at right now and some in Modesto. But there are other languages that don't have that ability. I think we also just need to take a step back and realize that as educators, we are better when we're able to problem solve together. So I'm also a big proponent of professional learning communities, because what I see teachers share around the table about how to help, for example, Nino, how did you get him to understand the vocabulary for social studies? The teachers that I can learn from are important. Did you use Realia? Did you use anchor charts? Did you use a mentor text? What did you do in your tier 1 instruction in order to scaffold? So I'm going to leave it at that for the moment, but I really believe that is the entry point into learning the language for our students.
So in a minute, I'm going to ask Lisa to catch up on the questions in the chat room. But Jessica, I want to go back to what you said earlier about creativity. One of the things that I've seen bring multilingual students together is the ability to do creativity. And you mentioned cognates. I've seen wonderful collaboration between art teachers and ML teachers to say, okay, here's a image, a vivid image of an advanced vocabulary word, and then they'll have it in English, in Spanish, in Arabic, in Vietnamese, and the whole idea is associating the visual image with the word. Are there other ways that you've seen to help students use creativity to become more engaged in learning English?
Well, I don't want to say it's only creativity, but I have one example from a school that I'm working with in Williamsburg, Virginia, and demographics have changed. And so they reached out and said, hey, we need some help. But what they did culturally is say, all of these kids are our kids. We are all responsible. So they didn't, say, only math teachers are going to worry about these students, or only reading teachers are going to worry about these students. It was our entire campus is going to be helping these students. And so what they did was choose some tier 1 instructional strategies and kind of divvying them out, and made teachers experts in that strategy for peer observations and walking around. And what I liked here was that the music teacher, Ms. Brana, she decided that she was going to take on the idea of using a word wall, because there were so many cognates. So when the students were able to see mezzo or alto, they were able to know what that meant.
Yes.
And if you go to her classroom, she also put up a map of various places in the world and had the students kind of tie back and put a pin in where they're from. So just an acknowledgement that I see you and I recognize you. And it was just, exciting to see, because it created a safe space. She herself is from England. So although English is her first language, I think she was able to connect on this idea of coming to a new country. So she really used kind of her instinct as well as using the word wall strategy, which is really the easiest way to go as an entry point, right? So I don't know if it lands in the creativity realm, but I just know that the idea of these are all of our students and getting everybody on board, including the music teacher, was
Yes.
very helpful.
I'm so happy that you said that, because it's back to what Dr. Collado said. What we need our ML students to do is to feel competent, to feel good at something. And too often, if all the emphasis is on English language instruction, it's easy to leave every class saying, gee, I'll never get good at this. And I want them to walk out of every class 30 minutes later knowing that they're better than when they walked in, whether it's music or art or linguistics or map reading or whatever the case may be. I just want them to feel competent. Lisa, what are some of the questions that we've got in the chat room?
Well, just Jessica Gomez actually shared it's about collective responsibility, and I was and then Tammy Rich said that it's about teaching the children to ask questions, not just say I don't know, which goes back to what Jessica Gomez said earlier about creating a safe environment for the ML students, or all students. So Jessica, I just wondered, Jessica Gomez, if you'd like to elaborate on your experience from collective responsibility and just piggyback on what Jessica Lucero said.
Yeah, so as Jessica was talking about, Jessica with the Y, I was talking about, she mentioned something about how as a school, right, we're all agreeing to focus on the students, not just one student, one teacher. And that goes for just in general when you're talking about tiered interventions, right? And how it can't just be one teacher being able to meet the needs of all students, right? So it really takes the entire school community. One of the things that we did years ago when I was at an elementary school was we had a high number of English learners, but we weren't necessarily, our staff wasn't necessarily being consistent with the strategies that we knew were most highly effective for our English learners. And so what we did was we sent a good number of teachers out to get GLAD trained. So basically it's about language acquisition and the strategies that you can use in the classroom. And so we did the kind of like a trainer models. And what we decided as a school was that for the month, let's just say for the month of September, we were all going to try one strategy. And we were going to all agree, like we would all get trained on that strategy at the beginning of the month at a staff meeting. And we all really went deep into what it was. And we said, okay, for this month, we're just going to keep perfecting and refining that strategy over and over, because that was better than no strategies, right? So at least at minimum, everyone was going to commit to using this strategy and refining it and bringing it to your PLCs. And then they have to bring evidence of them using it. And so then the next month we added on another strategy. So now they had 2 strategies to really get. And so as the time went on, they ended up leaving with, 8 different very effective strategies that showed, again, it was that collective responsibility that we're all making commitments to at least do at minimum these strategies. And that's a really powerful way to do it without feeling intimidated, because everyone is jumping in and they're all novices at it, but we're all working at it together.
Would you mind please going back to what you said about evidence of implementation? One of the things that we've learned at Creative Leadership Solutions is we're really good at adding things to the plate in education. We're not so good at documenting evidence of implementation. Would you say more about, if you were giving advice to me as a new teacher or a new administrator, how can I document evidence of implementation?
So, for example, specific to GLAD strategies, I think it stands for like guided language acquisition design. I think, right, Jessica, does that sound about right? And so for those particular strategies, there's a lot of visual things that you create. So it could be where you're creating sentences together. So a lot of it has to do with like butcher paper. You're pulling out the butcher paper and it's on the wall. So that was an easy way to just roll that butcher paper up once you were done with it. And so when we had our staff meetings, we could literally put them around the room and see what that same strategy looked like from TK, from kindergarten to 6th grade and everything in between. And that was a very powerful way to see how we adjust for each of the grade levels.
One thing I would just add, because I've seen that in California, that happens more typically in elementary school, but I've seen some fabulous high school and middle school examples of that, where people are kind of reluctant to do, oh, gee, this is too elementary. But when they do it at the high school level, it transforms what used to be the drudgery of individual homework into very active and vibrant engagement in the middle school and high school classroom. Jessica Flores, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Jess gave me an idea too. So for some of the schools secondary schools, because I'm working with all levels in California, one of the things that we've talked about, me with some principals or me with a group of teachers, is this idea of collecting evidence not only quantitatively, but qualitatively, right? So I think that can give an insight also to drive more professional development when it comes into anything like GLAD or the Tier 1 instruction. So maybe, for example, you go in and you have a peer observation form or something, and you have all the check marks. My next question is, how do you know that strategy worked? What does the data tell you? And that's a really good time in a PLC for a show and tell. So not only in a staff meeting, but if we all agreed in our social studies department that we're going to try the jigsaw, then we bring it in and say, how did your students who are newcomers, handle the jigsaw? Were they able to participate? So it's digging. I think part of it is just the constant questioning of what went well and what could we do better. Knowing it and Doug, you might like this. I always tell teachers our journey as an educator is an asymptote, right? I don't know if I'm ever going to reach mastery, but gosh darn it, I'm going to keep trying. And so that's the whole idea of showing up and just questioning and really learning from each other. But quality, once that comes out in a show and tell, then as a former principal, that's where I go, they can be the expert for that strategy. I'm going to have them showcase that like a staff meeting. And that's how we start to build internal capacity. I do say to know that you can't do every strategy all the time, but if you can hone into your particular culture of your school and select, a handful once a month, as Jess was saying, that is completely doable and not overwhelming.
That is so wise, particularly, look, half of our teaching force is new. we're losing 53% of our teachers every year. We've got to be able to take what you said so seriously that even if I'm in my first, second, or third year of teaching, I can at least be an expert at something. Because if we don't have our new teachers feel competent, then we're going to lose them too. So I really appreciate that note of encouragement. I've got a question for Dr. Collado, but before I do, Lisa, are there things that have come in the chat room that we need to attend to first?
No, I just want to also make sure that with our time that after your question that we address some of the submissions from our participants.
Yeah, I do want to make sure that we do that. But one of the things that you've written so eloquently about is community engagement. And I can tell you that as a teacher, one of the things I struggled with is how do I engage parents who are not comfortable speaking English at all, and they're not comfortable coming, frankly, to what they perceive as a government building, which can be alienating to them. How have you been able to, because I know you have, how have you been able to build bridges with parents and community who may not feel comfortable coming to a school building?
There's a number of things that, first of all, philosophically, some of our parents are not wired to intervene
Yes.
in school matters. Like my grandmother or my father would have seen it as a disrespect to be in the business of the teacher. Now, their role was to raise a son and a grandson that was respectful, that was yes, sir, no, sir type of thing. But we need their involvement. So what do? Mick Coleman and Joyce Epstein have done great work. Karen Mapp, if you want to see the work, have done great work with regards to meeting them where they are. Conduct a community map, locate those faith-based organization, community events where they live. I remember one time I was invited to a prayer group. Turns out that every one of them had a cell phone, downloaded the app, had some great coffee, met some wonderful people, and then invited them to the school. Another way is when people see their culture. One of the great things of being an American is that I could be a proud Latino with all my Caribbean background. And once you get a feel for the community that you serve and celebrate it as a community, and then celebrate, say, Veterans Day, commemorate Memorial Day, women contribution, and they see themselves reflected in the celebration, you get someone that says, that believes that school sees me, sees my reality, and becomes more involved. And by the way, in those meetings of celebration, you could say, oh, by the way, in that desk, we could set up a parent-teacher conference. We could do it online. We could do it face-to-face. We're going to have translation. And lastly, you want to know in your district what is available, what translation is available, what services are available, and what government agencies or local government have resources that you could disseminate throughout the school. So there's different ways. Just don't demand, because, and this is the last thing I'll say, be careful not to blame parental lack of engagement as irresponsibility. Let's look for it. Let's meet them where they are. Let's empower them to let them know that the school's a safe place and we're all in this together.
Well, Dr. Collado is being modest. He left out the part about food. I edited one of his chapters in this wonderful book called Beyond Conversations About Race. And he wrote this chapter about how do we build relationships with community when language may be a barrier. And one thing that breaks barriers is food. And you wrote so eloquently about that, that I really crossed many bridges.
Oh my God, it is food. I remember one time I was invited to a local church because the Haitian community had a mass celebrating the 8th graders going up to high school and the 5th graders going to middle school. It was some great food. It didn't matter. And the exchange became so genuine that there were teachers there and the principal was there and the APs were there, the guidance counselor was there. So it was like your family is here with our family, and the food and the music and the culture and the colors brought it all together. And oh, by the way, a lot of those kids, one of them is in West Point Academy right now. They'll be great Americans. That doesn't come at a price of making of them they not being less American and less proud of being in this country.
Well, and one of the things that your scholarship reminded me of is when I was teaching abroad, sometimes different cultures do not like to argue with each other. But when the subject of food came up, oh, Northern China, Southern China, Vietnam versus Paris, they'll argue about food all day long. And that is a great way to bring our multilingual students out of their shells and being willing to talk passionately about what's important to them. And food was it. So, you reminded me of that.
Absolutely.
Lisa, what else do we have in the chat?
Can I-
Nothing right now, but let's hear from Jessica Lucero, and then Jessica Gomez, if you could respond to one of the submissions from the participants, and then we'll Nino, if you could also, because I know everyone highlighted a few. Jessica?
Well, I'm just going to build on what Nino talked about, because one of the submissions earlier was about how do we engage more parents. I think, again, it comes back down to knowing your school and your community, but some things I've used in the past logistically is that I found a lot of Latin American families really use their cell phone as their main form of communication. And so WhatsApp is an app that they tend to use more frequently than not. And so at my former school, we created a broadcast list when we were able to get some numbers, and then we can send them out. Important information in Spanish and in English. I think it's really important to note that things should be translated where they could be. Because that's inviting. Sometimes I've worked with teachers that say, but sometimes our parents don't know how to read, which is accurate. The thing with a WhatsApp message is that you could put a voice message as well. So if you have somebody who's bilingual on your school site, they can send a message, broadcast it out, and the parents can hear that orally. I think that's also an easy barrier or an obstacle to overcome by using that tool. Other things to keep in mind is that we've used students in the past from feeder schools. So for example, using our National Honor Society students who might be bilingual, or any students in any type of club setting, if they could go down to, let's say, the parent open house night and serve as translators as part of, or interpreters as part of their hours that they owe for NHS. But what that does is show the students who are in elementary where the endpoint is for the feeder school. So it's trying to build in the community a little bit more broadly. So I didn't want to lose sight of those kind of logistical things that I've seen work. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
And then to address another one of the questions that was brought up was this idea of, we're probably representing various parts of the country, and we're probably representing various types of districts, from being very small to being very big, to being very rural, to being very urban. And experience, Doug mentioned that, 50% of our teachers, so many of our teachers are new. And I don't know if we get that much training in our teacher preparation programs to address the needs of our English learners. And so this lack of experience that maybe some of our teachers, one, it could be that our demographics have changed in our district, and we're not quite sure what to do with that now. I think that is a reality. But also maybe just a lot of our teachers that are coming in are actually coming in on intern status. So they're not even done, right, with their teacher credentialing, let alone have enough training to be able to meet the very demands of supporting and scaffolding learning for our English learners. So some of the things, and Jessica with the Y touched on it a little bit earlier about the power of peer collaboration during your PLCs. And, as an administrator, sometimes we would create our own professional development and say, you know what, there's some really great videos on like the teaching channel, on the teachingchannel.org or something like that. But the teaching channel has videos that shows instructional strategies in action with real kids, with real teachers. And you can actually find specific videos geared towards instructional strategies for English learners, for different different content, but also specifically, and then for different age ranges as well. So you can go for your very primary to your secondary students, and what would be those appropriate scaffolds for them. And oftentimes, excuse me, I would assign them to go into something as simple as a teaching channel, find a strategy that meets the needs of something that they're struggling with at the grade level, watch it together, have a conversation around, and plan a lesson, do like a lesson study, right? Plan a lesson, like what's coming up, and let's see, where can we incorporate this strategy together? And so then you're not left alone, right? Even if you don't have lots of funds to do some deep in ELs, professional development, you could do things like that where you can train yourself. I just remember a teaching channel was a great one, but you can literally Google that and you're going to find tons of strategies. If you check the GLAD website, I know that there's some free resources as well for that. They have some phenomenal strategies there. But I think there's a lot of power in that teacher collective efficacy when we come together and we do the learning together, right? And especially if you don't have, you're not used to having many English learners, it's okay to step out of your comfort zone and say, I'm going to be a learner, right? I'm okay. I need to be a learner as well. And I need to step out of my comfort zone and try something. It may fail, but at least I'm trying. And so like, even if you, like I said, some districts have lots of money to invest in it and others don't. And sometimes we have to seek it out ourselves. But I just that's a really great way tapping into your professional learning, your PLC, your grade level, your school as a PLC. Again, you can take the same idea of a staff meeting and doing it around a study around a video or a book study around some effective English learner strategies. It's a great way to get started if you don't have a lot of experience working with English learners.
Thank you.
So there's a great question that talks about getting teachers on board and identifying teaching strategies. And there's some great research as to why a lot of the ELL kids do well in science, specifically science that are based on group work and demonstration, and they're very visual, and they concentrate on mixing the students strategically so that the students support one another. That's one. The other one is that the judicious use of the kids' home language to be able to understand and digest the learning. If you happen to use a textbook that is web based, teach the student how to get the information in their target language, because just because it's available, it doesn't mean they know how to tap those resources. Right. So take a minute of your time to make sure the students could grapple with those resources. And about families, most of the school system throughout the United States have a system of communication with the families. Now, did you know that most of those systems have multiple ways to do Google type translation and convey those messages? Our school send a message every single Friday at 5 o'clock. There will be a greeting in Spanish and in English to our families. And when they register, usually they choose the language of preference. So those technologies are available. So for the teachers, though, bringing that information, that best practice to the PLC, like Jessica was saying, and discuss grading. A lot of the kids that are getting D's and F's are because they being graded as if they were proficient in the language. They may have the knowledge, but
right.
If you're going to grade me on being English proficient, then I'm not going to pass. So grading has to be discussed in the PLC, formative grading, hand-holding, support, so that the kids could get a fair shake. They don't get disappointed, and when they're 16, they don't decide school's not for me and drop out.
Nino, I really appreciate you bringing this issue up. It's a core equity issue, not just for multilingual students, but for everybody. Some kids go home to a English-speaking set of parents who have a wonderful environment and a quiet place to do homework, and some kids don't. Some kids go home to sibling care or childcare responsibilities. And the idea that we fail them because of their culture. We fail them because of sibling care or childcare responsibilities is just the ultimate definition of inequity. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And all I can say is, as you heard your colleagues saying earlier today, one of the things we've got to do is to get work done in class, not assume that all the work is going to get done at home. Moreover, what is a real issue for many multilingual students is that the government spends hundreds of millions of dollars on summer school projects, but a lot of our multilingual students are not here in the summer. They either work for a family farm, they work in the fields, they go home to their original country. So the idea that that summer school is going to get us out of this mess is crazy. The only things that work are what we're going to get done during the school day. And the more honest we are about that, the more fair and equitable we will be for our multilingual students.
Great, thank you, Doug. We have a small group, so I would like watching the time to open it up to anybody who would like to share out. If you'd like to turn your camera on and unmute and share with the panelists.
Hi there, Mark Wickens here. From Toronto area up in Canada. I just wanted to follow up on your last comment. And one of the things that kids can do certainly is you've got those dual language projects where they can use both languages. And I really like that, where you've maybe got the one language, their home language on the one side, and then working on English interpretations on the other. So I'm really glad that you hit that point, and it's a pleasure just to meet everybody here. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. I'm working on my dual language, Canadian in addition to English.
Perfect. Looking forward to it.
Thank you,
And
Mark.
thank you, Doug. As a professor at Brock University, I'm a retired principal actually, and a sessional instructor at Brock University, and have been for the last 14 years. I'm looking for my next initiative right now, but it's been a pleasure using your videos in my classroom for assessment evaluation, and certainly when it comes to ELL kids as well. So I also like that last point in terms of grading, because grading and equity is so huge. We don't want to turn the kids off. I do 100% agree. We've got to get the work done at school. And because you're right, kids are going home. They've got other things going on, especially in today's society, or they don't have a place to go to. And so getting that job done, getting work done at school is important to me to teach my new teacher candidates.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Professor. And let me just add, if you're supporting doctoral candidates, we have a volunteer group called finishthedissertation.org, helping doctoral candidates around the world to get that dissertation finished. So if that would be helpful to you or your colleagues in doctoral students, please send them to finishthedissertation.org. Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing with your new teachers that homework is ineffective. Because I don't know how loud we need to scream the research. It's ineffective for all children, especially multilingual learners. They need feedback. So,
and anything given, if it's not focused on the next day in class, it's had zero carryover. I think that's also what the research showed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Don't get me started. All right. Thank you, Mark, for sharing. I appreciate it. Tammy.
It's a pleasure being here.
Tammy, thanks for your participation and joining us today.
I'm retired now. When I was teaching, I had at least 9 different languages in my classroom. I did primary. And it was so important that we had a very structured being in the classroom so everybody knew how we did. I taught mainly 2nd and 3rd grade, but we practiced all the routines in the primary grades so everybody knew what it meant when we stood in line. And I think that is so important with all the different languages. You have to be really structured in what you do. The homework that I sent home was always something that the whole family could do together. They could ask their brothers and sisters, they could ask their neighbors, anybody. It was nothing that I ever graded, but it was always based on find a word or something like that, or make a word with a big long word. How many words can you make out of this? But it gave them that I can do something, and it built that trust that we were working together. And if you don't have that trust, you get too many kids that, one, they're not allowed to ask questions when they come home. You don't ask questions, you are only told what you're supposed to do. And they don't know how to ask questions or what that means and have that faith. But that true connection is what you need.
Thank you.
Tammy, I'm so glad you said that. And that is a really methodic way of learning structure. But what you also know is that you get to know the kids, their families, their interests, the positive connection with the families, letting them know school is not this big old or
Yes.
bureaucratic place. But when you reach out in that way, it says, I'm safe. I'm your son's teacher. We have that interest at heart. So those homeworks that you send, interview mom, interview dad, tell me about your uncle type of thing, basically says your family is important.
Mhm.
The pride you
Mhm.
have in your family, bring it into the classroom and we'll celebrate it together. And in that process, you tell the kid, I see you.
Yes.
And Tammy, I wanted to jump on that as well, because in the more, I'm going to say the more scientific sense, I used to be a science teacher, forgive me. But in the more scientific sense, the idea of creating procedures. So you took all of those students from different areas of the world and you created a community in your classroom and the norms for your classroom. And when you're doing that, you're creating predictability and a safe space.
Mhm.
So when students can predict how the day is going to roll or how the week is going to be with the intentional lesson planning that you did behind the scenes, that lessens that cognitive load for them about where do I turn in a paper, where am I supposed to sit, because they know what that is. And so then it opens up the capability for them to concentrate when they're reading or concentrate when they're doing math. But if they're having to navigate kind of a disruption in the classroom that's not predictable, that's when it's kind of fight or flight. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to say your good intuition and your intention behind creating those procedures is super helpful for our multilingual learners. So kudos to you.
Yeah. Can I just offer a word of support? New teachers particularly struggle with that. So for all of you as mentors for new teachers, help me as a first-year teacher, a second-year teacher, to really hear and reinforce what you just heard, because those sorts of simple norms that may seem simple to all of us, but it's not simple to a new teacher. We really need your support and your mentoring about that.
And we had a like a clothes hanger thing, and I took all my charts and stuff because there wasn't enough room to put them around the room, and I hung them on hangers. And then everybody knew if they wanted, okay, where could you go find it? Go look at one of the charts and see what you're talking about, and go look at it, so that they became independent to be able to go look. And the one that got me the most was a kid came up and said, how do you spell Australia? Now, my room probably had 10 different maps of the world on it. And the kid next to him said, I know where it is. It's in that No Good, Very Bad Day book. And they went off to the library to find the No Good, Very Bad Day to find out how to spell Australia. So you have to meet their pathway of thinking.
That's great.
Another term that I learned from watching a video by Stephen Krashen was comprehensible input, and just making sure that everything we do for kids that are learning language is just to make sure everything is incredibly comprehensible to them, displayed using hand actions, pictures, whatever it takes, video, just making sure it's comprehensible and taking small chunks and building on it. So I like that term, comprehensible input. So I teach that. I'm sorry if you went over that ahead of time. I was a few minutes late joining this group, but comprehensible input by Stephen Krashen influenced me.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Evelyn, I know you took unmiked, and then I was going to have Angel say a few words before we wrap it up and get ready for Wednesday. Evelyn.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Tammy that I teach middle school and I've taught high school. And when I'm working with English learners, I still teach those routines and those procedures. And I teach them daily for weeks on end. And I come back to them and I teach them again and again so that my students feel comfortable and safe in the classroom. I teach how to walk to the library, how to sit in the library, how to behave in a library. I teach all those little things. And back to the food, when I used to have to do I still have to do parent meetings, but this district has different rules. I always made the very first meeting I had, parent meeting, was a share your culture meeting. And I had the parents bring in food, and then I shared the culture of school, and I had all the clubs advisors and the sports advisors and everybody there. And we shared the culture of school along with sharing their culture and getting to know each other. And it was really successful. And it made them feel comfortable for them to come back to the other meetings that maybe weren't quite as exciting, but they kept coming.
Exactly.
And got involved. And it was a great way to kick it off. And it was food, and that united us to start with, and also led us into being able to talk about the culture of school. So I just wanted to circle back to those two things there.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thanks for joining us again. Yeah, I recognize you and your name.
Yeah,
So-
I tried to email you, by the way. I couldn't. The email I had for you did not work.
I just put my email in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Feel free to copy it. And I
Okay.
have my cell phone, so
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Good to see you again. Angel?
Hi there. I apologize for being late. I was working very hard to try and figure out how to get onto Zoom. Not my day. But, I want to echo what kind of synthesizing Tammy, Mark, and Doug is that my word that I like is purposeful. And everything that you are doing is allowing the instructional time in our classrooms. And I actually did the math for my teachers. If you're 5 minutes late picking up your children and you're 5 minutes early taking them out to recess, you actually lose 25 minutes a day just in that. And then you add that to how many a week, and you add that to how many a month, to how many a year. And my teachers decided to kind of redo the way things we do it, because they did not realize when every instructional moment has to be purposeful, losing 25 minutes a day, which is 2.5 hours a week, can be very detrimental. Because I agree with Doug. I never enjoyed homework myself. And I found that my students didn't complete it. So if we keep doing things the same way, we're not going to get different results. I don't care how pretty you make it, but yes. And so while I've got just a moment, I also want to thank everybody, because now in retirement, I have the pleasure of being the Assistant Executive Director of the California affiliate of ASCD. So we are international. So I hope you're all involved very much with your affiliates, because it's through that we have the opportunities to come together and bring you great learnings. Doug's been part of my career. I'm not going to say for how long, Doug, because you but let's just say I had 40 years before I retired.
Right. Great. Well, thank you for joining us, Angel. I appreciate it. And we appreciate the partnership. So why don't we take one last spin around, last words from Nino, Jessica Gomez, Doug, and then Jessica Lucero. I'm going around my screen here, and then we will prepare or enjoy our evening and prepare for Friendship Day tomorrow. Nino?
Inclusion, learning English is not a deficiency, it's an asset, it's a richness that we get to enjoy at our schools. And thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Nino. Love your passion. Jessica Gomez.
I just say, don't be afraid to try something new. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know how to best support my multilingual learners. I need some help. Colleague, do you have any ideas? Administrator, do you have any ideas? Is there a conference you can attend? Is there an online virtual PD session that you can attend? But don't be afraid to say, I need some help, and can you please help me out? Because like someone said, it's about being intentional and purposeful. And Angel was saying being very purposeful is you're not doing it for you, you're doing it for your students. So it's okay to not have all the answers.
Right. Thank you, Jessica. Good, very good point. And Doug.
Actually, I think you just gave me the title of my next book, Don't Be Afraid. We've got to be willing to sin boldly. We got to be willing to try new things. We got to be willing to make mistakes. If we do that as teachers and as leaders, that'll set the right model for our students. So I love Don't Be Afraid as our theme for the year.
Right. Thank you. Jessica?
Yes. Anybody that gets to know me knows I speak in a lot of analogies, and that's just the teacher in me. So you just gotta deal with it. When I'm working with teachers, not only inviting people not to be afraid, but also giving yourself some grace. And I think about that that story that how do you eat an elephant? One bite
One
at a
bite at a time. Yes.
And so knowing that if I give something a try and little by little, I'm gonna make progress. If I'm gonna try to eat the whole idea of how to make multilingual learners successful from day one, it's overwhelming. And maybe that's, as a teacher, where I shut down. The idea is stick to those 8 strategies, stick to refining your practice, even on 2 to 3, because that's something that you have in your pocket, and you can build on that the following year. And so I just think scaffolding for teachers, scaffolding for students, and give yourself some grace.
Right.
Well said. That's a great term, by the way, for Mardi Gras.
Is it funny?
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I appreciate all the submissions that we received prior to our webinar this evening. My email, my phone number are in the chat. Please feel free if we did not address your question or you would like further conversations with one of our panelists, our team, please feel free to email or send me a text or give me a call and we will get back to you. We pride ourselves on client service and creating evidence of impact for anyone that we partner with. So we extend that service to all of our webinar participants as well. So.
And Lisa, thank you for your leadership. We really appreciate it.
Of course. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining us.